Today on The John Ankerberg Show.
75% of the world's population will be in cities by 2020. Does the church have a strategy to reach the people in their big cities? If they don't, the Great Commission will never be finished.
We're not talking about rocket science here. We're talking about simple tools to reach the world for Christ. But it works.
We've gone into each city intensively for 30 days, working closely with the churches on the ground, a symphony of media. 30 days saying that God gives you the power to change. Call this number. Everyone that calls the number, they get a 100-page tailor-made book for that city containing the most powerful testimonies of how God changed lives.
75% of all the people living on Earth today live in one of the 500 megacities of the world. Consider the astonishing number of people living in just 8 of these cities. 38 million people live in Tokyo. 25 million live in Seoul. 13 million people live in Moscow. 8 million people live in New York. 4 million live in Los Angeles. 2 million live in Havana. 21 million people live in Mexico City. And 30 million live in Jakarta. Does the Christian church have a strategy for getting all of the people in any one of these megacities all talking about Jesus at the same time over a 30-day period of time? One man does, and today you will meet Hannu Hauka from Finland. His organization, Great Commission Ministries, has helped churches in 100 megacities of the world conduct evangelistic campaigns to get millions of people in their city talking about, thinking about, and asking questions about how Jesus can transform their lives. How does Hannu do it? Why is God greatly blessing his strategy? Today, you will find out on this special edition of the John Ankerberg Show. Welcome to our program. I'm John Ankerberg. Thanks for joining me. Got a very unique guest that's come all the way from Helsinki, Finland, and he's leaving our set and he's going to Cuba. And he is organizing megacity campaigns in some of the largest cities in our world. Cities that have up to 35 million people, some have 22 million, some have only 12 million. But how do you get that entire city talking about Jesus, considering him, wanting to know him? He's devised a strategy to do that. And Hannu, I'm really glad that you're here today. And I want to ask you the question, talk about the need for these megacity campaigns. How did you approach this in the first place?
Well, if you look at cities like New York, Miami, Los Angeles, you're going to be asking yourself the same question. How are we going to reach these millions of people, blanket these cities with something that is really going to touch their lives and move these people for the gospel? Well, in Kiev, which has a population of 5 million, I was in negotiation with 2 of the biggest denominational leaders. They were at the table there in a very small setting. And I said to them, how many people do you reach in the course of 1 year if you count collectively all your churches combined in this city of 5 million? And they said, well, we'd probably maybe reach or see 50,000 new faces in our churches combined in the course of a year. I said, well, that's a pretty good score. But you're being pessimistic. Let's throw in another 50,000. How about 100,000? But my question is, what about the 4,900,000 others who will never step inside your churches? What is your strategy to reach those people? As Jesus said, go ye and preach the gospel to every creature, starting from your own Jerusalem, your own city. And they said, we don't have a strategy. We have a strategy for our church, for our denomination, but not for our city. After which I said, well, why don't we just get together in the spirit of prayer, work out what God would have us to do together, so that 5 million people in this city would know who Jesus Christ is by the time this is over. And God allowed us to do that with spectacular success.
Yeah. Folks, this may be completely brand new to you, and I'm going to show you a clip that will explain these things and show you some pictures at the same time. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of the craziest spots in the world where Hannu has conducted these evangelistic outreaches. Beirut, Lebanon, into Jerusalem, into the Palestinian areas of Israel. And so we're going to talk about that as time permits. But first of all, let's look at this clip and he'll explain a little bit more. Watch.
Megacity campaigns are probably the most effective tool that I believe God has given this generation to reach the populations of whole cities, mega cities, with the gospel message in a way that they have not been reached before. And this goes back to Bill Bright. Bill Bright was the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ International. He said that there are about 450 mega cities in the world, that is, cities with a population of 1 million or more. And then he also said we had 50% of the world's population lived in cities. By the year 2020, it was estimated that 75% of the world's population would live in cities. And then Bill Bright went on to say, if we don't have, as the body of Christ and the Church of Christ, if we don't have a well thought out strategy to reach those cities, and if they aren't the focus of our prayers, the Great Commission will not be accomplished in our lifetime. And so that challenged me, obviously, to say, well, we need to target those cities. And if you go back to Mark 16:15, and this is, I think, very interesting. Mark 16:15, Jesus said, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. We have to ask each other, where are those creatures today? 75% of the creatures of our world are living in cities. We have to target those cities. Churches on the ground in a target city need to be involved. When I say churches, I mean you're talking about 80 to 90% of the churches in a mega city need to come together to agree that they will work together for 30 days during the actual campaign, but also half a year before as a lead up and a year after in follow-up, to work together to bring in a harvest, an unprecedented harvest in a mega city. And to do that, once the churches have come together and agreed to do so, then we take and we harness all the available media in a target city, using them in a concert, we say in a symphony of media. You're talking about television, radio, you're talking about newspapers, magazines, billboards, the public transport system, you're talking about the internet, every possible media that you possibly can have. For 30 days, you are heralding or preaching or proclaiming the fact that God gives you the power to live a changed life. And that becomes a very potent issue, because you are using not Western faces in India, for example, or Nepal, or Israel, or anywhere else. We are using chosen stories of dramatically changed lives from each target city. We are showcasing them on television, radio, billboards, newspapers, magazines, everywhere. And these people that we choose, or the churches choose, are normally well-known people with a dynamic story that will relate to the fabric of that city. And that will trigger a huge response. And the response comes from all the media. The response comes to a call center, which will have up to 60 telephones. In the case of Mumbai, we will probably have 300 telephones 24/7 receiving the calls. And when those calls come in, they are fed into a database. They are given to the churches on the ground. And the churches will deliver a book which we call Experiencing God's Power to Change. And we give that book to everyone who has responded to the campaign. And the churches, in addition to calls that have come into the call center, churches will have their own special events through which they also distribute these books to those who have responded in their special events.
Following the end of a megacity media saturation evangelism campaign, the churches on the ground go into high gear with follow-up. It's a time when thousands of people are led to Christ through one-on-one visitation.
Now, folks, you've just seen a little bit of what Hanu does when he does a megacity outreach. And he's done over 100 of these in cities over 1 million population. And one of those that I can't believe you actually tried to do was God led you to Beirut, Lebanon. And you actually did this in the Hezbollah territory of the city. How did you do that?
Certainly, that qualifies for a miracle. It is a miracle of God. When I'm asked by people like the pastors in Lebanon to come to discuss the possibility of conducting a campaign like this in Islamic territory, in territory that is ruled by the Hezbollah, for example, my faith starts to shrink a bit. And I say to myself, there are a lot of obstacles on the way, but God is always, obviously, He's bigger than anything, any obstacle that can be there. So when they said, okay, let's do it finally, we did do it. For 30 days, we did get the access to the billboards, newspapers, social media, obviously, websites. We had satellite television coming into Lebanon, which is not the best thing, but it's a good deal. So we had a bouquet or a palette of media. The big surprise came 3 days, during the last 3 days of the campaign. The churches rented the Central Concert Hall in Beirut, which holds 1,500 people. And they decided to have 3 special events back to back every single night. Prime time evening, let's say television time would be prime time.
Right.
And then they had the best gospel singers in the Middle East that were invited to sing at those special events. The best evangelists in the Middle East in Arabic came to preach at those special events. And so we didn't know what God would do, to surprise all of us.
Yeah, because it was
the
risky.
very first night, Lebanon State TV Channel 1, which is your NBC, ABC, CBS combined. They came to us, and I tell you, you cannot buy your time. You cannot buy into Lebanon State TV. You just don't have enough money to buy airtime over there. They came to us surprisingly and said, would you give us permission to air these special events, prime time every single night for 2.5 hours per night, no censorship, on Lebanon State TV Channel 1. And everyone just about fell flat on their backs. I mean, we tried to conceal our surprise and, jubilation, but I tell you, it was a miracle of God, with these people just walking up to us like that. And for 3 nights, consecutive nights, 2.5 hours, prime time, State TV Channel 1, broadcast the most powerful gospel message that you can imagine into every single Hezbollah home, every single Sunni and Shia home in the country. No censorship.
Yeah. What was the response?
We know that tens of thousands of people responded just, through the call center alone and through the social media, asking for the book and asking for counseling, asking for answers to their lives. Many of the people had to be met, in the midnight hours or at night hours after people went to sleep, because they came from Islamic families, and they were afraid for their lives. Yet they wanted to follow Jesus, so they met our counselors, that night.
Yeah. I want the folks that are listening to know that you have some requirements when you go to a spot, and it really concerns the churches. You will not come to any megacity unless the churches say that they will participate.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, first of all, if you're talking about a big city, you have to assume, and correctly assume, that the response is going to be fairly massive. If you're talking about cities of 10 million, 20, 30 million people, there will be massive response. We've seen that. There's just no doubt about it. It happens.
400,000 to 500,000 people will call in.
It can easily be, hundreds of thousands of people suddenly saying, hey, I want to know how my life can change. I want to read the book that has the stories that talks about dramatic change in life. And so you have a responsibility of following these people up. So in the very first steps of putting this thing together, you have to have the churches in a target city coming together saying, we agree to do this together. We are concerned about reaching our city with the message of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and you won't even come unless you have a large amount of the churches that say they will send their people to man the phones, that they will send their people to actually take the booklets to the people in the city that call in. Okay?
Correct.
So if you have 400, 500,000 people that call in and ask for the book that has these stories of changing, how Christ changes their life, now they got to be delivered.
That's
now,
right.
What other reasons do you need the churches?
Well, they also, because there's a big price tag to these media buys. When you buy, media cross-platform everywhere, as much as you can, for 30 days, there's a big price tag to it. So we say to the churches, okay, you can't pay for all of it. We understand you're not that rich, but at least you can bring in, something. Do a portion of this. If there are 1,000 churches in the city, we say, how about if you try to go for maybe 20% of the budget, and we'll try to find the other 20%, because this is a collective effort. I mean, we are all needed to make this happen, and we have a mandate from Jesus, the Lord of the church, saying that you need to do this. This is what it's all about. This is the Great Commission. And so we challenged them financially. We challenged them with volunteers. In Mumbai, as I said, we had 15,000 volunteers trained. You've got to have that. Churches need to supply these volunteers so that they can be trained. But the churches also need to commit to a follow-up process. It's not just, having, new members in your church, dropping into your pews out of heaven. People don't drop into your pews out of heaven. That's not how it works. There's a lot of effort that has to go into this. And therefore, you have to commit and say that I am buying into this. This is our campaign. I want to own this. Our church wants to own this campaign because we are seriously concerned and committed to reaching our city with Jesus Christ in an unprecedented way.
Talk about the follow-up. What is the follow-up procedure?
The follow-up procedure is very simple. When you get the phone calls, obviously, a book is sent out to everybody that requested the book, and you're talking hundreds of thousands.
It's not just mailed. You actually have a person hand carry it to that person.
They are hand delivered, and we try to send them out by twos because sometimes there can be problems. You never know who you're going to be talking to. They don't identify themselves over the phone. They give you an address and a phone number and a name, but you don't know who they are.
Yeah, it can be dangerous.
Yeah, but I mean, the flip side of that is there's also so many people that the churches would never, ever, reach, through traditional means. For example, in Nepal, the very first phone call that came into the call center in Nepal came from the chancellor of the University of Kathmandu. And his first words were not, "Good evening, how are you doing?" and so blah, blah, blah. His first words were, "You have 3 minutes to tell me why I should live." And boy, I tell you, that puts a whole new seriousness into this whole thing. We sent out one of our best men who was qualified to speak to the chancellor after 3 hours of in-depth counseling and just
explaining the gospel.
Follow-up, explaining the gospel. The chancellor's life was saved. Would the churches in Nepal ever have reached that chancellor otherwise? Probably never. We get response from the Air Force, from the Navy, the infantry. We get them from the security forces. We get the police force. You get students. You've got the regular farmers. You've got the fishermen. And you've got everybody. It's like a big dragnet or a net that is cast into the sea, as Jesus said, and you bring it up, and there's all kinds of fish in it. That's the beauty of these campaigns. When you bring those nets in, there are just so many different kinds, shapes, and sizes and colors of fish that the church normally does not see in their church services ever.
What are the reasons why the Mega City campaign is effective?
It's effective because we are actually doing what Jesus had told the church to do at its very core. There is nothing more central to the kingdom of God and church life than the Great Commission. And that's why God has promised to bless it. And if we are seriously engaged in doing what Jesus told the church to do, we can expect that God will really bless our efforts, and He does.
Yeah, another reason I believe is because you do not wait for people from the outside to come in, but you use people that are in the community to give their testimonies, to tell on TV and on these social media and in the magazine and the booklets. The fact is that Christ changed my life. And you have maybe movie stars of that culture, or you have great businessmen or sports figures that people would all know in their culture, in their language.
Correct.
You also have all of the problems of the alcoholism and drug abuse and broken marriages, those kind of problems. So you have stories that cover the whole gamut in that culture by people in that city.
That's
all
right.
right. And so this is not from the outside, this is from the inside. And I think that's one of the reasons this is very effective. People are talking to their own people.
And that's why churches get so excited about this. They're saying, hey, this is not somebody coming from outside, putting their face on our billboards or onto our TV sets. This is our own people walking our streets, the people that have a dramatic story to tell, just like in the New Testament, in the Gospels, full of transformation stories, all the Gospels. That's where we got our idea. I mean, that's what resonates with people. And so when you choose the transformation stories that go into the book and onto the television programs and onto the billboards and so on, you choose, as you said, a gamut or like a whole array of people that represent different facets and aspects of life. So something somewhere in that book resonates with every person that picks up that book, and they actually say, hey, this story is something like what I'm going through right now. This is my life. If he experienced the power to change, there's hope for me. God can change my life too.
We've only got a few minutes left, Hanu, and yet you've got a critical need that we want to help with, and that's You've got a plea that's come out of the Soviet Union, out of Russia, okay? You've got one that has come from Cuba. Tell me about these two needs.
Well, first of all, Russia, we have printed 5 million of these books over the past years. As a result, 1,600 new churches were planted across Russia. The churches have begged us for more. They said, can you give us another 1 million books? Russia is closing down big time. We have a small window of opportunities to still print 1 million of these books inside Russia, in printing houses inside Russia. But that opportunity will not be with us for long. We need to do it now if we want to help the churches of Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to happen right now, and it could close any day. We need to do that immediately. But second, great things have happened in your megacity outreach in Havana, Cuba, of all places, and you have a need there. What's happened?
Well, there's an unprecedented time of harvest ongoing right now as we speak on that island, in that island nation, in the capital city, Havana. The church has received 150,000 books, which were used as the key tool for reaching out to 100,000 people in that city, just one-on-one alone. The books, they've run out of them. And they have said, we urgently need 150,000 more books to continue to bring in the harvest that God has now allowed to happen in Havana. We must not miss this opportunity. Please help us with another 150,000 books.
Yeah. One final question is that for a lot of years I've been telling our television audience, there's a fella up in Finland that wanted us to come and be on television. You're that fella. And we finally, after 3 years, have said, yes, we'll take Finland. And we're looking at Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And why did you want the John Ankerberg Show to come to those countries?
Well, because our societies in Northern Europe and Scandinavia are very secular, very humanistic, rejecting God and the idea of his existence. 80% of our population says there is no God. And so it's a post-Christian society, long gone. It has become a pagan area of the world once again. And the John Ankerberg Show addresses this. The John Ankerberg Show is an apologetic to the existence of God, and it gives reasons why God is important in our lives today. And so it's a perfect fit. We need to have this show on to millions of people living in Scandinavia. And I believe God has led us to you, John.
Yeah. Folks, what you've heard, I mean, it just blows your mind of what God is doing in these megacity outreaches that Hanu is involved in. And now you're leaving for Cuba right away. So you made time for us to do these programs. I thank you for that. And we're going to have you back. And folks, I hope you'll stay tuned. I got a personal word for you in a moment. Now, folks, since we taped our interview with Hanu, the situation in Russia has gotten much worse. The Russian government has massively cracked down on all of the evangelical churches across Russia with new laws and regulations, severely restricting what Christians can do. Hanu has received an emergency request from 1,600 evangelical churches in Russia, pleading for 1 million more Power to Change books be sent to them before the doors in Russia close for good. I called Hanu in Finland and asked him to tell us what is happening to the evangelical churches in Russia right now. Listen.
Well, John, the Russian government is doing everything to make it impossible for the evangelical churches in Russia to continue to minister and to preach the gospel. We have received reports of baptismal services being broken up. We have reports of 74 pastors that have already been charged under a new terrorism law. And the Russian government has cracked down on all of the evangelical churches with new laws and restrictive regulations that have been added to the law that was signed by President Putin last year. What are the new laws? The government now states any evangelical church, any church with 50 members or more is designated as a potential terrorist target, and as such they must hire and pay for government security agents to be on site and to attend every church service. Can you imagine that? In addition, every church is required to add very expensive metal detectors to the entrance of their church. Now, churches simply cannot afford to pay for these security measures. This is simply a way to crush the churches financially. So what happens if the churches cannot afford to comply with these new regulations? Well, the law says that only 50 people can come to their church. Will they be forced to gather somewhere else in groups of 50? Will they be able to even attend their own church as visitors right now? Nobody in Russia knows. In past years, I have conducted 40 megacity campaigns in Russia, and as a result of our activities in Russia, John, I have received an emergency request from 1,600 evangelical churches for 1 more million copies of the Power to Change books that were used to lead 2 million Russians to a living faith in Jesus Christ earlier. Now, these same believers who have now received these books and become Christians, they are now asking for 1 million more books that they can also pass out to their friends and neighbors to lead them to Jesus Christ in the same way. Right now, God has allowed us to use the printing presses inside Russia. We cannot print and import books, but we can still use Russia's printing presses. And therefore, I feel that this opportunity that we have can very soon be lost. So I'm asking you for your help right away to provide 1 million more Power to Change books to lead 1 more million Russians to Jesus Christ before the doors close for good in Russia.
Now, folks, the Christians in Russia urgently need our help now. And if you will help, there are 5 ways you can provide the needed books and help our ministry's outreach. First, if you will give a gift of $30, your gift will provide 45 books for people in Russia. Second, for a gift of $100, you can provide 150 books. Third, for a gift of $500, you can provide 750 books. Fourth, for a gift of $1,000, you can provide 1,500 books for people. Fifth, for a gift of $5,000, you can provide 7,500 books. And if you're able, and God allows you to do this, a gift of $50,000 will provide 75,000 books. Again, Hanu has received an emergency request from 1,600 churches in Russia for 1 million more Power to Change books. And they need our help now before the door closes for good. If you will help, please call us now at 1-800-805-3030. That's 1-800-805-3030. You can call that same number any day this week, 24 hours a day. Or you may go to our website at jashow.org, where we have a secure place for you to give your gift. The circumstances in Russia for Christians have drastically changed, and the need is very urgent. If you can help, please call us right now at 1-800-805-3030. I'll appreciate your help very much.